Welcome to the EMN podcast, where philosophy meets disaster and uncomfortable truths meet the profession we call emergency management. This is not safe space thinking. This is the arena. Let's begin. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine land. And there's Arthur. And we are excited to be talking about wargaming, gamification training, and we have brought with us an expert in that area today, Dr. Arthur. And Arthur, good morning.
1 second. I always forget I gotta plug my headphone in.
Well, we hear you fine.
My fancy mic.
Yeah. Fancy mic. And Andrew, how was your weekend, my friend?
It was good. It was busy. We traveled down to Maryland to visit my in-laws to celebrate my mother-in-law's 85th birthday. And so we drove down there. We drove back. We picked my oldest son up from college. And so now he's home for a couple of weeks. And that's the story. So, and Arthur, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning.
Oh,
likewise, sir.
It was good to see you for a moment there. Your camera's out for a moment there, but we can still hear you.
I love live.
There we go.
So real quick, everybody. There's some great announcements to say. My good friend Dan Scott is now literally moving from one part of the country to the other. So as this transition is happening, Andrew is stepping in to be an official third wheel, not in a bad way. We're a trike. We're not a bike any longer. And, so this is awesome. So Andrew will be here on a more regular basis, and I'm excited to announce that. And of course, when Dan is settled in at his new location, we'll get him back on. I think the conversations will be great. And so I'm excited about that. So Andrew, thank you for agreeing to be a regular part of the EMN podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. And shout out to Dan. Always enjoyed listening to him and look forward to just taking his place for the short time or joining forces here as the third wheel, as you mentioned, creating greater stability as a trike instead of a bike, so to speak, and exploring some of these topics with you. So I want to thank you, Todd, for having me join you here, and look forward to speaking to the audience here and engaging.
Awesome. Well, it looks like Arthur has fixed his issues, maybe. And Arthur, there you are.
See if I can switch my 4K camera.
There you go.
It's a little more temperamental. There we go.
It is. Hey, you gotta love live recording. So we are coming to you live here, and Arthur, you've been working in the gamification / wargaming space for a long time. You did some of your research on that, and I wrote an article yesterday or on Saturday about it, about how we need to start moving away from the static, typical, meso-led trainings that seem to be predictable, and that everybody at the end of the day slaps each other on the back and says, "Oh, you did such a wonderful job," and the after-action reports are always glowing. And what do we learn from that, and how do we fix our shortcomings? Does wargaming, and this will first question out there, does wargaming fix that problem? And if so, how? And Arthur, that's to you.
Absolutely. So, what's unique about wargaming is it's different than any other exercise type under HC, and it's the practice. As if you watch my research or read my work, predates Homeland Security. I like to say as old as the American story itself, goes back 2 centuries, and is the oldest form of training, education, and exercise medium. So with that, and it's proven, it's proven to truly save lives, to make major impacts and contributions, and has huge implications for U.S. policy over history. So the way it tackles things differently is, one, introducing probability and chance. And probability and chance is fantastic because unlike any other types of H-sheep exercises, homeland security exercises, and evaluation program exercises, people can actually fail within disaster wargaming in many different ways, whether it's operationally, whether it's with a task or assignment, big and small, right? There are many different ways to fail. So with that, that adds a lot of variability into the game because the game switches from being MISA-led. And when we talk about being MISA-led, really it's our exercises under HSleep are so scripted. It seems like we spend more time pushing injects to try and reach a threshold where we can actually stop, make a decision or not, talk about it, within our exercises. Wargaming cuts out all of that. We focus literally on decision-making the entire time. The whole game is focused around decision-making and understanding inputs, and then the consequences, the outputs from them, right? There's a whole scientific and mathematical formula for that. So with that, the second interesting thing is when I set out to build my disaster war games, most people think I just made a game, but I made a whole framework, a methodology, a system adapted from the military style, the NAVAL's model of wargaming. I spent 2 years doing it, and it is applicable to any problem set, mission area, hazard type under Homeland Security Emergency Management. And uniquely, what I call my chaos system introduces variability and random chance for failure across the game. So we use card decks, right? They typically average around 200, card decks in our game, 200 cards per deck in our games. And with that, they are random injects. But these injects, right? The players or the participants pick these cards, and they'll introduce random to points or decisions. All of these cards are tied to the game, and they're all based on real life incidents, real life headlines, real life things that have happened, and they'll create impacts. They'll create decision points that are part of the greater disaster. So with that, we get away from scripted missiles, and with the 200 injects, I've never once seen anyone come close to using all 200 cards in a single game. So with that, we built in a lot of replayability, a lot of variability, and those are two of the most fundamental ways we use to break up that scripted, heavily scripted kind of play. It's almost like exercises are more plays these days, right? We're showing up. It's a performative art. We want to look good in front of our bosses. We want to be like, yes, we have now validated what we wrote, but we didn't actually test it to see if it actually worked, right? Or where it's broken, or where our assumptions are bad. So,
and I agree with you there. And that's kind of was my point in the beginning. It always seems like at the end, everybody, when we do the hot wash at the end of a exercise, it seems to be always complimentary. And how do we learn from that? Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question on that because it seems to me that gaming, and I just as a, I guess full disclosure, just to the audience here, we know each other, and we actually have a project to work together at some point in the future. And I've been involved in gaming and designed a lot of e-learning around game-based learning and things like that. And I think from my take, there's a potential gap between what we would call procedural competence and adaptive competence in terms of responding. Can you just speak to that point specifically as far as really, I think, the material difference between what your EOC gaming and wargaming does and brings to the table? Literal table, I guess, as opposed to the average tabletop.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great way to put it. So procedurally, we, a lot of emergency management, a lot of our programs are built around the procedural, but procedural competence is vastly different than achieving true readiness, right? When we're talking about readiness, and that's what I often say that when, so the second half of disaster wargaming is the evaluation framework that we have. And this gets into the true measure of effectiveness of a team. And we actually measure for 3 different areas. So one is team efficiency, right? 2 is strategy and tactics, and we look for adaptability, right? Or the inability to adapt to changing or emerging threats or hazards, right? Different types of environments. And then lastly, plans or policies, right? So I would say almost all HCP exercises focused specifically on plans and policy. They are trying to build competence around the procedural about, okay, did we check this? Did we do this? Did we check the box? That doesn't really get you very far. There's not a whole lot of, it doesn't validate very much outside of, yes, we know what our plan says. We did what it says. Were we able to adapt it? No. And fundamentally, there's something extremely wrong there. So this is one of my favorite quotes. So going back to World War II, then General Eisenhower, on the eve of the invasion of Normandy, right? He's prep talking 101st Airborne. They're getting ready to drop into Normandy that night. And he would go on to famously say, plans are worthless. Planning is everything. And fundamentally in emergency management that we always look to, and even our criticisms when disasters go wrong, incidents go wrong, did they have a plan? What is the significance of a plan? The plan is a foundational aspect of a program. It is the baseline. It is not the final end product. Eisenhower would say planning is everything, right? Actually learning, understanding, working, networking, what each other's capabilities are, how we operate, how we work within a community, that being the most valuable thing. And because it's followed by the second famous quote, no plan survives contact with the enemy, which is true. Any disaster, we always say disasters are always unique and every incident is different, right? Even if they're similar, there's going to be similarities, of course, right? We should be looking at plans as the basis for our responses, our recovery for any phase of activities, and we should be evaluating how adaptable they are to a range of threats and hazards. Right? I mean, emergency operations plans were originally meant to be all hazards, and following federal doctrine, the only two following that sentiment, the only two hazards that were truly supposed to be unique and really required deviation were blackouts or chemical, biological, right? So there's a lot that ties into that, but fundamentally we've shifted this. That's kind of principally weird. We've shifted away from understanding that to focus. Well, we wrote a plan. We're all in on this plan. If there's something outside this plan, we're so rigid in our operation. It's like a train derailment. We can't get off the tracks. We're in, and it shouldn't be. So,
and it seems to me, I want to turn things back to Todd, that rigidity, right, in terms of deterministic type of planning, if you will, right, becomes brittle and fragile when it meets contact with the reality of the world, right? It's when that generator breaks down. Oh, we thought the generator was going to be there. We always thought that we were going to have we had 72 hours of fuel supply. But what happens when we reach hour 96, in the event and we don't have that resupply because we didn't anticipate that there would be shortage of fuel supplies? And this has actually happened. So
it's happening right now. Yeah. Think about, if you want to take a look at historical context and how to implement that into training, you can just look at the oil embargo of the 1970s, and are we getting there today, right? Just for perspective, everybody, I filled up my tank at half because I always do my stuff at half tank, right? And I don't use premium, I use regular. Right, because I just drive a Honda Accord, man. I don't drive any fancy things, and it was $5.68 a gallon, just to kind of put that in perspective from where we're at, right?
Yeah,
so yes, so fuel's expensive, and I was just reading an article today, just kind of put these things into perspective. We'll go back into the game talk here in a minute. That air travel is going to be more expensive now because of the war over in the Persian Gulf, and other travel restrictions are happening. And due to 300 some odd TSA agents have quit, and so now all these things are playing into travel. And could you have gamified that scenario? And really work through some of the issues. Is that something that you can do, on the fly, or are you right? Okay, good.
In short, yes. So using the system, I've actually been able to prove and show we can do it live for all kinds of things. Because again, it's a framework. It's a system. It's a methodology that I can apply on the go. So I was out 3-4 weeks ago, a month ago in Illinois. I I was gone all of February traveling to conferences and to states across the U.S. doing exercises, training, as I often am these days. And in Illinois, we actually presented. So I was the keynote at the Illinois MABUS, Mutual Aid Box Alarm System Conference. And I talked about gamification, how it changes the approach to training and education. And if we really want to, advance, then this is the way to do it. So part of that included a live demonstration. We actually used the game system. We opened up our new game, Chelsea County, our Emergency Operations Center Complex Coordinated Attack 8. And I have a special toolkit for instructors. And I used that toolkit to then, we actually had the local county emergency manager there. I said, can you, she provided a map of her county, and we walked through, and I used the game system. And I'm like, please place these units where they would be within your county. These are your resources. So let's talk about a recent incident. You had a major hazmat incident last year, and we used the game to work through that problem, work through that scenario and the hazard just on the fly like that. Now, in different contexts, I'm actually working on games for like the Air Force, with that on base drone incursions, for example, right? Drones are all the rage these days, because we're seeing that live in Iran. How cheap and effective they are, and how ineffective our defensive capabilities are against drones, right? We knew this just looking at the Ukraine-Russia war, that drones was a major game changer, right? I mean, you think about the U.S. the U.S. invention of drone warfare long before this was dominant, right? It dominated our ability to have effective reach, U.S. effective reach, to expand U.S. effective reach into theaters and domains that normally we couldn't, right? Using drones, we unlock new military capabilities. So drones have just continued along that line, and now we're seeing actual threats to the homeland. If you saw, there was an FBI warning issued that Iran could launch drone strikes off the coast to hit targets in California. Which there's historical precedent for that. The Nazis actually during World War II, for the first year of the war, they raided the East Coast. They would sink
Japanese
ships
did too, though.
off the East Coast.
Right?
So
I mean, the
Japanese
send firebombs. They tried to firebomb the Northeast, or the Northwest, and because it was too wet, it didn't work. But they actually had firebombs hit. I think it was the Seattle.
Yes.
Somewhere in that area.
Yeah, there are some cases of them, and there's some great movies that depict those incidents. So it's there's historical precedent for it, which is I think interesting, and it's a pressure tactic more than anything, right? They're trying to hit back. So using drones, which are cheap and can be weaponized fairly easily. And they have their military version, of course. Sorry, I won't say that. I won't try and say the name because I'm going to butcher it. But they're very effective with this, right? And that represents a risk. So that's one example of a war game that we've adapted to drone strikes. And then there's other things, like it's not just literally when you look at wargaming, most people think you're moving operational forces on a board. Typically, war games. My system, Disaster Wargame, works across 3 levels. There's the tactical, the operational coordination, and then there's the strategic. On the bigger scale, for example, we have a hurricane war game that we're developing and about to release. It's our the Great Texas Hurricane, and that spans a massive area, right? And that's because we're looking at supply chain logistics across multiple states. So you can scale up and down using wargaming. You can apply it to different things. You can even wargame policy outcomes and decisions, right? There was actually, it's funny that you were talking about, could we wargame what's happening in with the Strait of Hormuz right now? They did that back in 2007. There was a war game that was held to understand what would the, not necessarily strategy and tactics be to combat Iran, but what would the economic fallout be, and what interventions could work to release, to ease that pressure burden on the American economy. And sadly, they found out there were really no real strong, viable interventions or solutions to this problem that we're going through real time right now. Fundamentally, it's going to take the end of the war, and it's going to take regional stabilization and peace to resume that. So, and those are real lessons learned coming out of a 2007 military war game held with policymakers. So,
Well, there's a couple questions that came in, and we'll start with Ethan's question here. And he says, as a gamer himself, he'd like to know what your thoughts are on the importance of deploying a game master compared to allowing the game itself to be incorporated only elements of random chance. And he goes, I love that EM disaster gaming comes in and incorporates
Incorporates
both.
both.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I find that this is important for the beginning of wargaming, so organizations with no one in the experience in wargaming. And yeah, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Like, is there a dungeon
Absolutely.
master?
We use the term game master, which is more universal. We actually have a whole instructor series, so you can get certified as a certified disaster wargaming instructor. We have 5 levels. So level 5 is basic facilitator. Level 4 is intermediate. It's instructor. Level 3 is when you're fully competent at game master, and each level has different skills. You actually open up a task book to get to level 3, and that takes about a year, because at the end of that, you have to be able to develop your own campaign using the disaster wargaming framework and system. And it can be any problem or hazard or policy issue or whatever, but you have to show that competence to do that. And then above that, there's wargame designer, and then grandmaster, like in chess, right? So you can see here, my shirt is, disaster wargaming grandmaster. But the importance is huge. So the game system is designed to be played where if you're a single EM, you can be the game master. You can double up as both playing as the emergency management role within the game, which is also the banker, and the game master. There's a challenge with that though, because it creates there's some conflict, some bias that goes with that. Traditionally, like Dungeons and Dragons, the game master is separate. They're independent. Their job is to facilitate the exercise, the campaign, the story, and to be the referee. Following and building on that dungeon master practice, we use game masters, and I actually recommend that you have an independent game master, so that this way they can hold people accountable. One, they can referee, they can do all those things, and they focus on really building out that scenario, that storytelling, adding that narration, and guiding folks through an experience. The way that experience unfolds is fundamentally going to be determined based on the dice you roll, the cards you draw, the choices and the decisions you make, though. So as I joke with my wife, we have this joke about our carpet, Harbor Fog. She picked it, right? So when you determine the outcome of your decisions or the cards you draw, you picked it. You're responsible for that outcome. The game master is that expert, that outside expert that independently, guides the exercise. So that's our preference, and because of that, we just launched our Disaster Wargaming Academy. I actually was in Houston a few weeks ago, and I trained our first cadre of Disaster Wargaming instructors in Texas, and we're actually working to partner with a couple of colleges and universities to be able to offer college credit and to have certified Disaster Wargaming instructor part of official collegiate curriculum. So that's coming out really soon. So.
And that's awesome, Arthur. And okay, here's another question. This one's going to be maybe a little bit more doozy for you. There's a question regarding that. I guess in the past you stated regarding making EM a uniform service, and how is that connected in any way in how you develop your games?
It's actually not at all. So it's an interesting historical point. If anything, I think people may confuse the symbology. EM disaster gaming builds on that historic symbology. It's one of the most widely recognized symbols of emergency management still today and around the world. The question's a little funky in that it's not. It doesn't really impact how we design or develop games. But I will say that when you look at historically our civil defense origins, I just wrote that article on Eleanor Roosevelt, the first female director of emergency management for Women's History Month. What's interesting is that during the civil defense era, emergency management was uniform, right? It was uniformed, and it was like that across all levels of government, federal, state, local, for the purposes of being uniform and in lockstep across all levels of government. What's interesting is that during this time, because we had this national threat that the American public united against, we had the most successful volunteer program in emergency management during the civil defense era throughout all history, right? So some 10 million volunteers, some 10%, between 10 and they say between 10 and 12 million volunteers estimated participate in civil defense, and it was for the whole family. The whole community approach originates from Eleanor Roosevelt's vision. Father, air raid warden, mothers, American Red Cross nurse, son, daughter, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all of them, the whole family contributed to the war effort. Not this elite group or what we see with certs, very far and few in between these days, and 10% of the U.S. population. With that, I would say there is something to that uniformity that stood out, and perhaps it was a combination. I would argue it's a combination of things. Having a national threat that united the American public to all step up to prepare a whole of community, whole of society for threats and hazards that we don't have today. And then two, the symbolism. The symbolism is highly important, and that symbolism still lives on in the U.S. There are still counties, there are still cities, Hawaii, in Iowa, and all across the U.S. that still use a variation of this symbolism. You can see the EMCD for the origins, right? It's unfortunate that in the 70s, FEMA kind of divorced and came up with the EM stars, which no one understands. So if you ask the public, if you were to go outside and ask someone, what's an emergency manager? They would have no clue. It'd be all over the place. The first responder, the guy who's in charge of first responders. No, civil defense is more commonly known and appreciated. And again, around the world, it's still called civil defense. They don't use emergency management. They don't call it emergency management around the world. They call it civil defense, right? And it is such a much more natural kind of transition and understanding that there's a difference, or even civil security. That's a little more postmodern term. It's more understandable and relatable and able to allow one to conceptually place it within the life cycle ecosystem of disaster management than emergency management. They're fundamental issues. Anyway, in short, we build on that iconic symbolism, and our games often feature an emergency manager using this symbolism on the front, or and back in the cover of our games. So it helps people conceptualize and better understand, to some degree, who the emergency manager is. That's different, from police and fire, and they each have their iconic symbologies. So, in short, there's a lot of history that goes into support that.
So one thing I just wanted to comment on that you just said there, and that's and I'm not sure if I'm getting the cognitive effect correct, but what we call the Proteus effect. When one assumes an avatar in a gaming environment, they assume some of the characteristics or the powers associated with that, right? We've seen that with games like World of Warcraft, instilling a sense of optimism and confidence, and just the team building skills that happen with some of that. And I would say probably my assumption is when someone goes to put on a uniform, whether it's their firefighter, police officer, EMT, even the military, you're assuming a certain persona, a certain characteristic associated with that, right? So to speak to that point, what I wanted to change gears a little bit, because I think looking at the research that's been done on gaming, and I want to speak to the idea of failure. Failure is a lesson, right? There's
learning.
So when we fail in a simulated environment, right? There's no consequences to the public. There's no consequences to our, at least the decisions that we're not going to be brought up on a hearing, so to speak. But there's the aspect of being around your peers. And so I guess there's a couple of questions to that. Is how do we address that with wargaming or, emergency management gaming that you're engaged with? And what are the ingredients that need to go into it to make it more effective and to ameliorate that type of issue? In other words, I don't want to look bad in front of my peers, so to speak.
Absolutely. And we usually give a little brief history on some of my famous case studies that went into this. So that's a major problem. And I think that's one of the most fundamental problems with HCEP and emergency management present day, right? We're putting on tabletops and we're walking away like we're ready to handle Armageddon, right? Like Bruce Willis just walked off, the shuttle and we did the thing. That's what it seems like these days. But when real incidents happen and reality meets the artificialities we've constructed, things fall apart very quickly. We see this over and over and over again. And I relate that is what the fundamental issue that I identified going into this was that we want to change outcomes for disasters, for decision making, for the things we're seeing that make national news over and over and over again. Fundamentally, the issue has to do with how we are educating, how we are training, how we are preparing, how we are readying ourselves for those incidents. And if we want to change that, we have to change how we're training and educating, right? So with that, one of those things includes getting over the stigma of failure-based learning, right? Of course, no one wants to fail or save face. And everyone wants to save face. No one wants to look bad for their policymakers. This is the medium, though, or the time to do it. So it's cheap, it's effective, it is easier, and it's more tolerable or understandable. For some reason, it's relatable if you fail in a game, because there's the whole gamification piece kind of adds to the allure of failing in a game versus failing in a different exercise type. And I have seen people fail full-scale exercises. I'll tell you this time where I was at a full-scale exercise, and literally the group that went in that was supposed to triage at the start of this 120 agency mass casualty exercise, one of the largest we had done back in the day in El Paso County, called Noah's Ark, took 2 hours before they called any of the resources. They went into this exercise, they were working through triage, but then they kind of didn't know what to do. They were just overwhelmed. And it set this whole exercise back that was planned out for the whole day. 2 hours, and eventually someone had to step in, and controller's like, we have to move on. You're holding up everything else, right? So failure does happen, and it's really consequential when you've got tens of thousands of dollars spent and hundreds of folks out. In wargaming, it is more tolerable, and that fundamentally goes to the purpose of wargaming. So my favorite example, and one of the ways we're changing how people train or educate or train or approach exercises in emergency management and disaster management, even first response, is that we say that, so traditionally under HSAPE, you would do a scaled kind of exercise system, right? You would do a tabletop, and then you'd maybe do a functional or a drill, and then you go on and you do a full-scale exercise. That's kind of like the 3 exercise arc, and it's over like maybe a year or a couple of years. It takes time, right? With wargaming, fundamentally, I tell people that we actually recommend doing a 2, 3, 4 game series over 2 or 3 days. And what we're looking for is we want to fail quickly, fail often, fail small. So we can identify things for intervention, come up with those top 3 lessons learned or policies or changes we need to do in our plans or whatever, and put those into the next game series and see how those affect the outcome of the next game. And then likewise, so it becomes a test bed, a modeled and simulated environment where we're able to rapidly test bed simulation and simulate different interventions at speed and at scale. And that comes directly actually from the World War II. There's a famed example that I use to kind of build this into our methodology. Admiral Nimitz, who after the bombing of Pearl Harbor was tasked to lead U.S. Pacific forces to fight the Japanese. And at the Battle of, this would culminate in the Battle of Midway. And they wargamed that hundreds of times. After the war, he said, we wargamed Midway hundreds of times, and the only thing we were unprepared for were kamikazes. And so to think of the mentality that, if he had only exercised that once, would the outcome for the Battle of Midway have been the same? Right? And there were a lot of things that had to go right for the Battle of Midway to go the way it did. Right? There's tons of literature, tons of video, tons of breakdowns and case studies on that battle. But the approach that they were prepared for all different kinds of variables of outcomes and were able to adapt to truly be resilient and to be ready for a range of consequences, however they occurred or unveiled themselves, was revolutionary. And so that is something I was like, we need to take this. Why aren't we doing this? Why not take this into practice? And so that's something fundamentally unique to disaster wargaming, is that when we exercise this, when I'm going out to agencies, we'll hold a game and we'll do multiple of the same game doing that at scale. So, and the results have been fascinating. People, it changes their, and telling them this little bit of history and the why. The why is just as important as for why we do the exercise to begin with. But explaining that has made a huge difference and made it more tolerable and acceptable to people when we come out to facilitate exercises for agencies, big and small. Because they see the value, they're able to understand and connect that value so more easily. So
I
and
do I do
it becomes fun based learning, even though it involves failure, because they understand that we're trying to get to a point where we can understand those problems and then change that approach.
Can
so
I just
what one of the
Yeah, go ahead.
oh go ahead, Andrew.
I just wanted to jump in. So there was some research done on flow. There's a book called Flow by
Oh, yeah.
yes, it's and I will attempt to get this as best as I can because it's a Polish name. Michaly Michaila. I'll put it in the chat when I can find it. It's a great book, but it talks about basically what creates creative flow. And so when you're doing gaming, right, it gets you into that flow as opposed to, we think about it, a lot of these tabletop exercises, so easy to get wrapped up in our cell phone or in the other things that are going on.
People check out.
Yeah,
People check out.
I'll wait until they get to my part. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll wait till they get to that part in the play where I have my part.
Yes.
I'll go back to my mental dressing room to
Yeah.
sort of take part in it. So, so I think that is an important aspect. Todd, I'm sorry, I jumped in on that.
No, it's okay, and it actually kind of builds upon what I was going to ask. It's like we're in each other's head. So one of the problems that I've seen with training when we do, especially functional exercises, is in the leadership side, we're looking at that 30,000 foot, how things are going, and then when you get down to the individual firefighter or police officer who's unseen, they're kind of like, I'm just told to be here. I really don't know what's going on, and I really don't get much out of this training. And I want to compound that. And when I was in the military, we would do practice battles all the time. We do this thing called a CAX. We'd go to the desert and we'd pretend we're in the middle of a desert invasion or whatever we're doing. We'd hit the beaches and when we're doing beach stuff. And the same thing with us. We'd hit the beach. We go. As I told somebody, I said it's like a bunch of adults playing cap gun war, pow, pow, pow,
Yeah.
and then
absolutely.
and then we're done, right? And like so does wargaming the way that you see it, and specifically today, are we able to include the baseline players in this, where they learn something out of it too?
Oh, absolutely. So we had this game. I got a couple of things I want to note on this. We had a game in South Dakota where we actually had multiple agencies. We had multiple chiefs from different fire departments from all over that we did in December. And what was interesting is the chief actually called in. They called in a bunch of the guys that were just on shift, and there was this probably 22-year-old firefighter. And this other guy, his partner, they were part of an ambulance crew that was there, and they were actually able to play, and they picked it up really easily compared to some of the chiefs who had it took a little bit longer for them to get in. And he jumped in, and he became the hero actually in front of his chief. His chief was probably so proud. We could just see it, like, because he's over there like, yeah, this is how you do this. And he was actually able to play through. Now, that's just one example of an individual playing, and I'll get to the question in a minute. Hey, Nick, good to see you. Nick's so those of you just asking, Nick Lalone, can't speak this morning, is another gamer, fellow researcher, professor. So Nick's doing some really cool stuff on different sides. So I just want to say, hey, thanks for hopping in, Nick. Good to see you. So with that, it all depends on scale, right? So within our games, if we're playing down to like a smaller scale to where you're playing as individual units, individual resources, individual people, right? A person has different capabilities, training, education, experience that's going to affect their ability to interact with a border situation. We can play down to the individual level. The bigger the game, though, generally you're going up in scale. So if I'm doing, say, a war game that Hurricane Sandy just hit the eastern seaboard, it is going to be at a massive scale, like we're doing task force or groups of task force or resources, or that's a scaling question in my mind, is how do you get those individuals involved? Now the leadership thing is actually really interesting. So the leadership question that and so when we were making this game and we launched on Kickstarter, we actually had elected officials that reached out saying, hey, I think your game's really cool. Is there something to do for elected officials? And so we went back and actually worked in how to add elected officials and actually give them something to do within the game, but that was interactive, right? So with that, we actually, so if you've seen the Simpsons movie, there's this great scene where I joke, President, the head of the EPA goes to President Schwarzenegger and he says, "Sir, we've got this situation in Springfield. I've got 5 unforgivable options for you." He's like, "Number 3, you don't even want to read them first?" And he goes, "I was elected to lead, not to read. Number 3." So we actually came up with a card game that has 3 different policy decisions they can make. So they get a policy problem, a real life policy problem from the last couple of years, 2-3 years now. And from that, they have 3 things they get to decide they can do. They can execute a policy, they can enact a plan, they can make a change, some variation of 3, right? So, for example, there's a great one where it's the federal government and the White House is blaming your administration for failed disaster management. What do? Do you defend your government's approach? Do you appease, or do you defer and blame a different level of the state government? Right? All real policy options that you can choose, and you learn a lot actually how your elected thinks and how they might choose to handle that situation. And then we still have the dice rolling. We still have the probability and chance they could fail, because appeasement, defending, or deferring can also blow up in your face. And that fundamentally goes back to the probability and chance of that success and failure. We build that into everything. So, but it gives people in different role sets different things to do, and that outcome from that their decisions will affect the greater game. So just like with an individual firefighters, we can, it's a scaling issue. We can have individuals play through individual roles in games, much like, actually, so talking with Andrew, and Andrew's done some great game design on mass care sheltering. So I'm working to partner with Andrew to do some mass care sheltering game stuff where we talk through individual roles and setting up and managing a mass care shelter, right? And at that level, we're at that scale, we're playing at the individual level. So it just depends on the scale. What is the purpose? What is the problem set that leads the game? Sorry, and to go back to Nick's, now I can answer Nick's questions here. Logistics and politics.
What I think, yeah, Todd, I think you're on mute there.
Hey, Todd, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I'm back. So Nick has a follow-up. It says, "I'll ask about logistics and politics, where universal missing in wargaming outside the attempt from Westinghouse in the 60s. Given the nature and the need of politics in EM and request dependency on logistics before, during, and after hazards, how are you designing this around what's been missing for almost 200 years?" It's a really good question.
No, absolutely. It's a fantastic question. So we actually have politics and policy in the game in different ways. The first thing is there's a few hard ways you can lose a disaster war game, and one is political turmoil. So we have a political turmoil system built into the game and political turmoil is defined as the public's trust and faith in your elected and appointed officials and leadership's trust and faith in you and your team's ability to manage and navigate the game or the crisis, that incident, right? There are things in the game that you will do that will cause political turmoil to go up, such as casualties or losing things, losing resources, not managing certain incidents within certain time frames. And that's all based on public perception and our understanding of tolerance, public tolerance, right? Public tolerance, for example, in our counterterrorism hazmat war game is high, because terrorism is an extraordinary incident, and there's generally a greater public tolerance than things that are more common or routine, like a wildfire. Wildfire mayhem, public tolerance, that political turmoil is actually, we backstop that at 20. You hit 20, it's game over. And what I say is that when you hit 20, what happens? Basically, they fire you. The state attorney general usually calls you and says, "Don't leave the state." So, hashtag, you look at St. Louis, you look at Maui, you look at other places, you pick a headline. These are very real consequences. So we build in politics. That's one way we build in politics. The second thing, the policy is really interesting. That so we have a card game, but then lastly, when we're doing our highest form of disaster wargaming is when we're doing an actual facilitate, evaluate exercise. We actually hold people to their plans and policies, and we say the game is driven based on your current operating status or the current things you have in place, right? And that's purposely. So your ability to interact or operate within the game is based on these constructs that you have built that define how you do that. So outside of that, we are exploring different ways to include policy or politics into the game. So disaster politics are very interesting. I was at Defense Connections, a military a wargaming conference last year, and they were actually talking about the concept of an entirely operational war game that precludes or doesn't include the tactical logistics moving on a board component. And they said fundamentally it's a challenge because in wargaming everything is so representational, and however you're abstracting at different levels, you still have to make it to where you're able to move or interact things on a board to show different skills or inputs and outputs. So it's fascinating that there are different approaches, and I've seen people do it different ways, but we're trying to incorporate policy and politics or political outcomes and decision making into different elements of it. And each one of our game systems or games that come out, we try and incorporate different elements, different kind of components. So like public alert and warning, for example, is something we're working on in our hurricane scenario, our hurricane game. So it's, every game we try and add different things, different systems interact with to measure kind of different kinds of processes or decision making and the consequences of them.
So Nick says terminal is more of a whammy than a process, a factor or a bar than something that we can control. That's pandemic legacy stuff. Because I suppose it's a better term is how are you teaching things that folks aren't already trained in, process over mechanics?
Gotcha. Thank you for refining that question. How are we teaching things? So there are different elements, and it depends on the type of war game and what's the problem set we're looking at. So and there are different ways we can teach things, right? We one of our game modes actually that another emergency manager came up with was if we wanted to teach people different roles and missionaries and responsibilities of different agencies, a great way to do a familiarity drill is to have different stakeholders or community stakeholders play different roles and get coaching by the actual people who work in those roles, right? So that's one thing. If the purpose of the game on a different scale, if we're trying to teach professionals or practitioners the importance of, say, disaster logistics or supply chain management, or one of the bigger lessons that we include in all of our war game is disaster logistics, is that there's a delay. So within all of our disaster war games, we have a resource allocation system. And that's tied to the fact that most emergency operations centers take time to roll up. It takes time to scale up and to have everyone there to be able to execute, coordinate, and support incident operations. The first 3 rounds are usually the most painful because we hold people to the fact that there is a delay before you get resources. You can't just, like in tabletops, the badges like to wave their hands and say, oh, we'll just drop a task force. We'll just drop a strike team. We'll have air support come in. I'm like, really? Have you ever called for that? You know how long it takes to roll a task force or a strike team? And so because of that, we force people to go through this it's a bit of a painful process to request, and that delay built in to acquisition more resources, right?
I want to interrupt you for 1 second, Arthur. Sorry, I know you're in your flow. But that's a good point, because we've done so many trainings where people who are participating, number one, are forced to be there. They're not there on their own because, so they don't necessarily want to play. I put that in air quotes. And I've had it before where you go, okay, you get an inject that says, oh, we're in the middle of a civil unrest, and what are you going to do? And then you get somebody who goes, oh, I'm going to order 100,000 police officers, whatever, some ridiculous number, right? And then they're like, okay, cool. And next thing you know, they go, oh, they're here. I'm like, wait, that was like 2 minutes ago that you just ordered this huge amount of resources. You need to have that delay in there, but they're so
like that's crazy. That'll never happen.
Right.
That's unless the Democratic National Convention is there and there's 100,000 police officers, or Republican National Convention, right? Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. So with that, it's just those are artificialities or assumptions we build in, and then people act like those are the thing. So private sector, yes, so I will say I'm working with another organization to develop one exactly on supply chain, on different things. So for private sector emergency management, we build, and so we can build and create games tailored to any problem set. Our commercial games are the ones we do big scale runs for, and those are the ones that the reason they cost so much is because I'm ordering 1,000 to several thousand units at a time. So, but we can build bespoke custom games, or we can for agencies we get a lot of those requests, or we our commercial series we have on a timed release. So every year we release a couple more different commercial versions. But so to answer your question, Jeremy, but whatever you're looking
So
for, I'll
let,
put
let me
my
read let me read
email
that
in
question
here.
really quick for people who aren't watching. It says there's a version for private sector emergency management. There's a lot of the same issues, supply chain, public view, etc., that affect us, but in different degree, in different ways. So, Jeremy, thanks for that question. And I know I interrupted your flow on your answer
Oh,
to the question.
no
About how
worries.
to get
So
people
to go
involved.
back to that, so we force people through that acquisition process. And what we're trying to teach though is that and so this goes back to the wall of can fire. Should you be sitting, so you don't have enough resources to tackle this major flame front. Should you be sitting task forces on the side of the road waiting to engage for when you have enough forces, which might be several operational periods from now, several days from now? Or is there a more effective use of those resources? During the actual Waldo Can fire, that was the logistics section chief for the day shift. When that happened, when that blew up and destroyed 354 homes and killed 2 people, I will never forget the moment. The county fire marshal came in and said, Arthur, I need you to pull every resource, every task force, everything you can get out of Southern Colorado in the next 2 hours, because we have to put emergency fire line in that night to stop the fire from destroying more of the city. And with 4 people, we had 4 people. We thought the fire was over. We had 4 people staffing logistics, and 4 people called every single fire department, every single station, begged, pleaded for, hey, can you send guys? Can you send crews? Do you have available? We pulled together 28 engines, and it took, it was 3 hours before they were able to get there. So trying to get people to understand and to learn lessons that work. So there are lessons we do include in the game that we try and subtly add in. And this is one of the great ones, is that with resource acquisition or allocation, you never get everything you want. You never get it all at once. It takes time to ramp up. And is there more effective ways to allocate your resources? Should you truly be sitting resources that you don't have enough to engage a fire of that scale on the side of the road, like what happened in real life? Or should you be helping out with the evacuation and the other consequences of that we show real time on the board? And so it's really interesting, because we've had people that will be like, no, we'll wait, and they'll make a stand, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe it blows up in their face. We've actually only had very few people that have been able to successfully pull that off. And that's, a direct attack in wildland firefighting is extraordinary, as we all know. So, but other times we've had a lot of people that are like, well, let's think, what can we do? So, and it's interesting, because then they'll go and they'll deal with the consequences, and seeing the holistic picture of a community, because our war games play you nicely get to see the natural ICS EOC interface, provides a different perspective or view of the whole community versus just big bad thing, fire, smoke, whatever it is in front of me, bad guy. So we do try and incorporate lessons in there. And it all depends on, I think, fundamentally, what's that problem set, or what are those things we're trying to get in without being overt, like, oh, like, told you so. But yeah, that's one of those things. Another one we're looking at, actually, with the current kind of federal grant funding cuts or disaster declaration, being mostly denied, is economics. It's incident prioritization. So we have a number of games that are coming out. We have this new one we're working on that's basically focused on recovery, and you deal with having to make a couple of critical decisions at the start of the game as to, you have limited resources, what do you save? And from that, what are the consequences of that should you not get a disaster declaration? And that affects recovery and whether your community is viable going forward from that incident. So you play through, well, we let the major economic driver, we let the Amazon or whoever, that hospital system, whatever, burn down, and now they're not going to rebuild because the insurance or the threat, the hazard, the mitigation, whatever it is, post-incident is too high. What do we do? And in this case, we're showing that we're trying to show that the different kinds of decisions you make, whether they're tied to economics, can have detrimental impacts post-incident for recovery. Because we live in a period now where if you don't get a disaster declaration, if the federal government doesn't come bail you out, then your community may never come back, right? There were a lot of incidents pre National Flood Insurance Act, right? That whole towns were flooded and they never came back. Even today, there are incidents. You don't get a disaster declaration, that's what's on the stakes. It's the gravest of stakes. Your community may never come back. So those economic drivers, I think, really change incident prioritization. When it comes to when push comes to shove. So that's just another example. I always love your questions, Nick. I think you're doing great work. So, and if you ever want to work on anything, please reach out. So, cool.
All right, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that first of all, having played your game before, I played the EOC game actually in the beautiful Adirondacks when you were there, and I think one of the things for me that stood out is having developed games, the mechanics, how well tuned the mechanics are, so that it prevents folks from, I think as you stated, and I'll the analogy is waving a magic wand and saying, "Oh, I'm going to deploy 5 engines within an hour or 2 hours." That's not realistic. Okay, and if you are, it depends on the quality of the facilitator for a TTX who decides to push back on things like that, to say no, that's not possible, and having some sort of honest rules to play by, so to speak. I know, of course, there's always, it's representational. There's artificialities associated with the game as well. However, it's based upon somewhat the realities, right, that we deal with operationally, whether it's logistics, whether it's political considerations, constraints, and so forth. The one thing that I will say, having been involved in the development of games and played the games, etc., one of the things that for me is a huge marker of success. And this is something when, as we discussed, developing whether it's mass care, what have you, is if people are willing to say, I want to play this again, like they get up and they're ready to go and I want to play it again, I want to try it again. That to me is a measure of success. And so what I've seen from your postings and then actually my interaction with the game is that's always the case. So
Absolutely. So we have a lot of people that are coming back. That's why I'm happy to teach other disaster wargaming instructors, which is a good thing because now people want to be able to recreate that magic. They want to do it, and we actually really cool story earlier this week on Tuesday. So Nebraska, we went out, we did a disaster war game for them. They loved it. They actually did a different one. They'd never played Wildfire Mayhem. They have a major 20,000 acre fire that just blew up and their state EOC activated. They called us back to come facilitate an exercise on Tuesday, the day their state EOC was activating, so they could prep for that activation and what they might deal with. So actually using Wildfire Mayhem to prepare them. And that was a really cool example of trying to achieve a state of readiness. And they did that real time because they saw the value. They loved it. And if you look at our socials, you look at our feeds, we have amazing reviews. People really love the game. They see the value of it. So it's exciting that we keep being asked back. We keep being asked to do more games or more expansions. I've got a ton of people that I'd say my top 3 requests for expansions or different games are like schools, hospitals. Those are 2 of the big ones, and different palm sets. So, and we're going to keep making them. And releasing these. So it's exciting. It's exciting to have people see the value and want to do it. So, and then I will say, so just a closing note here, because this has really blown up. We are holding our first event called Disaster Gaming Con. We're actually holding an event dedicated to advanced exercise design, modeling, simulation, gaming, and we're bringing what I call the convergence: military and defense, emergency and disaster management, and gaming enthusiasts together for a 3-day conference here in Colorado Springs to focus 100% on the latest and greatest in all things modeling, gaming, simulation, tech, even AI, and talking about these innovations and showcasing them. So unlike some of the other conferences where we tend to focus a lot on talks or death by PowerPoint, even with this conference, we're wanting to show people, to give them a hands-on opportunity, not just to hear people talk, but to actually play, to try new things, to try different types of games, the disaster games of all types, even military wargaming. So I hope you guys will go to our website. You'll check that out. This will be October 8, 9, 10. So we're looking to hold something new for emergency managers that bring together, practitioners, academics, students, and to talk about advancing exercise design and showcasing different ways gaming can be applied, not just wargaming, disaster wargaming, but gaming, and we can, taking different approaches. So, because fundamentally it goes back to my founding kind of principles that if we want to change the outcome, we have to change the way we're approaching training and education. And gaming, gaming is the means that I believe in. So I think that's how we'll get there. Yeah.
Well, Arthur, thank you so much for your time today. I know that, with emergency management training and how we do things, we need to look for innovative ways to make things fresh and exciting. Wargaming may be that step in the right direction. And if you think it's for you, reach out to Arthur and find out how you can make it part of your training cadre. Andrew, it's always a pleasure to see you, my friend. And you'd like to say anything before we go?
I was just going to say a pleasure again to join the podcast as your co-host and at least temporarily taking the place where Dan is, and look forward to having when he comes back. And nice to start off the official, let's say, podcast duties talking to Arthur here.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was just going to say, good.
One question. I know I just interrupted you twice. It's maybe 3 times that little segment. What are you? Because you always have some interesting books and stuff. What are you reading right now, or what are you?
What am I reading? Let's see here. I've got a list of books actually. So I do. I usually have a list of. I have a list of books. I'm trying to think.
I asked that question specifically for selfish reasons because I like to hear what people are reading, and then 90% of the time I go and I grab the book that they're reading.
What are you reading, Todd? That's what I like.
What are you reading? I'm trying to think.
I'm actually reading a philosophy book right now.
Let me grab it.
So you can't go wrong.
So this is my newest book here. It's called it's by Thomas Schelling, The Strategy of Conflict.
Huh.
He's a Nobel Prize winner for his work in game theory, conflict and cooperation. This is the man who actually came up with the word collateral damage, by the way. Famed wargamer. So 2005 Nobel laureate in economics. I just picked up his book. So as reading, because I want to learn more about the man I idealized. So and that inspired my own work. So The Strategy of Conflict by Thomas Schelling by the Harvard Press. And then I did want to share, actually, there's a free book right now. West Point University, West Point Press just is releasing a free book on game theory and the art of war. So you can actually order it now. If you go to their website, there's a link where you can actually get a free copy of this from West Point Press. West Point is actually the first U.S. military academy and institution in the United States to adopt wargaming in the U.S. after the Civil War. So I'm really curious to see their book and to read it. I would just recommend that because it's free and it's coming from West Point. So I wanted to share that tidbit there. So for anyone watching, and then lastly, anyone who's interested, you can reach me at Arthur, my name, ARTHUR, at emdisastergaming.com, or go to our website, emdisastergaming.com, and reach out that way. So
absolutely. Well, all right, everybody. On that note, Arthur, Andrew, everybody, stay safe, and as always, stay hydrated.
When the sirens scream out loud, we're the voice that breaks the cloud. Heads held high when things go wrong. We'll guide you through with strength and song. Disaster strikes without a sound. Chaos reigns, but we're around. Public safety in our hands. Standing strong in every land. Imagine